It's not that the people are in charge, but that the people's desires are in charge. The people are not in charge. The people exercise no decision-making power within this environment. So democracy is reduced from something which assumes an active citizenry to the idea of the public as passive consumers.
Oh.
Driven primarily by instinctual or unconscious desires, and that if you can in fact trigger those needs and desires, you can get what you want from them.
Howdy, folks, and welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb, joined by executive producer Jack Rabbit today. Hey, Jack.
Hello.
And like for folks who follow us, you know that is a different opening to the show than we normally do. You heard the awesome kick-ass banjo music to begin with, but rather than my dulcet tones, we actually kicked you right to a powerful clip from a profoundly important documentary called Century of the South. So Jack, I'm going to kick it to you because you're like, I remember seeing this a decade ago. You brought it back to my attention. You and I have had some really important conversations about this. And I really want to admit, y'all, this show, Jack's really driving the program because he had the great insight. He and I have had some very important conversations about Century of the South. And frankly, I've had some insights thanks to Jack bringing that documentary back into my world. So Jack, I'm going to put you on the spot to say, hey man, how come we playing a clip from Century of the South here on Redneck Gone Green?
Well, thank you, David. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here and watching. When I saw Century of the South, it blew my mind. If you haven't watched it, highly, highly recommend it. I feel like there are so many insights as to why we're in a place that we are today regarding consumerism, right? So, we hopefully you've seen the Reverend Billy episode that we did, and Reverend Billy and the Church of Stop Shopping was just like this, wonderful idea. I never really quite understood exactly why consumerism was so pernicious, such a scary and kind of like an evil thing. For me personally, I was just kind of like opposed to, like pursuance of material things. I thought, we really need to kind of like have ideals to fight for and work towards. All that to say, Century of the Self was really important to me because it revealed that the conditions that we live in today regarding consumerism and the fact that we're so eager to pursue material goods as opposed to paying attention to our civic responsibility, our neighbors, and what have you, is an actual intentional campaign that it has been ongoing for like 100 years at least. But it's also a campaign that is the campaign of the elite, the 1% versus the 99% that's been going on for millennia. It's just in today's world, it takes the form of public relations. And Century of the Self is the story of how the enterprise of public relations began with Sigmund Freud and his nephew, Edward Bernays. And we're going to talk a lot about Edward Bernays in today's session because Bernays is the originator. He's the father of public relations. And so I want to talk quickly about him. I don't want to just continue to talk without having David on the screen as well, though. But Edward Bernays started out, the father of public relations. He started out actually as a war propagandist. He worked with Woodrow Wilson in World War One to actually sell this idea that the United States was spreading democracy. And one of the things that I found particularly fascinating was that this idea of spreading democracy, this is a new idea, right? Because it's like what was going on in Europe at the time of World War One was that you had these you just had these monarchies, you had these different countries that had their own ways of doing things. But here comes America, and we're spreading this idea of democracy. It sounds so idyllic and so like modern and egalitarian and humanistic. And I believe that wasn't Wilson started the League of Nations, I believe, that ended up becoming like the United Nations. And Bernays, who worked with Wilson to push this war propaganda, was amazed to see that it was so effective. That when Wilson went to Europe, that people were just in love with him. They were celebrating him. They were cheering him. And this idea of like that he was there to spread democracy, they loved it. They loved it. And so what Bernays did was he kind of thought to himself, oh, well, if we can convince people in this way, if we can just basically push this message onto people that's so powerful and so like all consuming for folks, well, maybe we can do this during peacetime. Maybe we can take these ideas of manipulating people's emotions, right, which is what war propaganda is all about, and use that during peacetime to convince people to buy things, right? Um, and so and 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 so that's really what Century of the Self is about. It's about the way that this guy got these ideas from his uncle Freud, who and Freud's ideas, just to kind of summarize them very briefly. I'm not a psychologist. I didn't study psychology, so I'm not like really super keen on exactly like how to describe Freud and his ideas. But ultimately what Freud was saying, and the big takeaway from Bernays and for the people who were influenced by him, was that Freud was saying that there is a unconscious life that we have that is submerged. Like human beings are like an iceberg. Our minds are like an iceberg, and we only see the top little part. That's the part that we relate and that we kind of understand to be each other, right? But that underneath that ego, what he called the ego, underneath that is this miasma of like monstrous thoughts and ideas and emotions and energies that were needed to be controlled by the ego and this idea of like who we are and our rational minds. We're basically controlling this deep demonic unconscious. And the elite and what the elite at the time saw was that the horrors of World War One, and eventually the horrors of World War II as well, were the result of the masses unleashing their inner monster, their unconscious. And so what what Bernays did, inspired by Freud, was to be able to say, well, what happens if we manipulate people using their emotions to convince them of things that we could not explain to them rationally? We can't expect them to be rational creatures, but us as the elite are capable of manipulating. And so what we end up seeing is this advent of manipulating people using their emotions to be able to associate products with emotions. Now, this is something that was new at the time. It's so weird to me. This is one of the things that I found really fascinating about the Century of the Self documentary. Is I think most of us were so inundated. I mean, we've grown up with it. This is something that we understand from the moment that we're born, because we've been inundated by so many advertisements. It's just taken for granted. But at the time, like in the early 1900s, things like objects, items, things that to be purchased, most people, they purchased what they needed. They didn't have, like, luxury goods was not something that people purchased. And advertisements for goods and services were presented in a way that was very utilitarian. It was like, do you need to get from point A to point B? Well, you want a car, and this car is reliable. It will get you where you want to go. It's like, it wasn't about like how glamorous it was, how it would make you feel. Today, like, that's all everything is about. It's all about how we feel. It's all about like associating our feelings of satisfaction and self-esteem and what have you, associating those feelings with products, right? With items, with external objects. And one of the insidious things about that we're going to talk about is that in the same way, that we have been trained by the media around us to see products as ways for us to feel a way. We find out that eventually what also happens is that politics ends up being sold to us in the same way. And this is ultimately, I'm going to bring this back to like why I understand now why consumerism is so insidious and so pernicious and so anti-democratic. The reason for this is that we have been trained to see our personal satisfaction through what we purchase, the objects that we can buy. This is what we today, because of like literally a century of mass marketing, we understand and identify our feelings, our sense of happiness and fulfillment with objects, with like these external objects. And consumerism is insidious because we don't see politicians and policies, the society that we live in, as being the place where those feelings are satisfied. Those feelings are that we want that to change, so that like we want politicians to change the environment around us so that we can have more fulfilling lives. Instead, we don't see that coming from our politics. We don't see that coming from our communities. We see that as coming from the products that we purchase. And that's why consumerism is so insidious.
Thank you, Jack Rabbit. Folks, you're listening to and or watching Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck. I have gone green, and I'm trying to convince you and others to do so as well. You were just hearing from Jack Rabbit. Jack is our executive producer. He's a personal friend. He's a longtime organizer, and he is an insightful thinker. What Jack is describing is an amazingly powerful documentary called Century of the Self. It explores the profound influence of the psychological theories and consumer culture created through a combination of Sigmund Freud and his nephew, Edward Bernays. Bernays specifically introduced the concept of manipulating desires for societal control. And the documentary Century of the Self takes insightful narratives, it takes archival footage, and through 4 series of films, it describes how mass media, advertising, and politics all come together to deceive, exploit, and shape both desire and ultimately collective behavior. For my way of thinking, Century of the Self really provokes us and forces us to reflect on the complexities of human nature itself, the power of persuasion, and most importantly, what Jack is ending in is this very blurred line between what we're actually thinking about and manipulation, and ultimately what is the good life. So to me, this is why it's so profoundly important that we understand this, right? So I'm going to take a step back and say, remember that capitalism as an economic system is about who controls what goods and services are produced and distributed, and who profits from the overall system, right? Now, this is why mass marketing and public relations is so pernicious and so important to understanding what the hell is actually happening now. Because as Jack pointed out, at the turn of the century, as capitalism and industrialism is beginning to drive the entire society, at the time, in order to advertise something, all you did was describe, this is the characteristics of the product, this is the cost. Literally, that's it. Like there was nothing deeper. There was no effort to try to think about, manipulating and controlling desire. The assumption was, we're going to just describe what it is. Bernays took the insights of Freud. And again, look, Freud's the founding father of psychoanalysis. In essence, Freud believed that the unconscious mind was really influencing conduct and behavior. Freud proposed that human behavior is driven by those unconscious desires, memories, conflicts, usually stemming for Freud from childhood experiences. He definitely emphasized the coping of inner conflicts, sexuality, dreams, and the Oedipus complex. So it had a lot of controversy, but at its core, Freud revolutionized psychology and how human minds actually think about things, and took it outside of the rational person and into an understanding of humans as much more complex. So this is why, if you go ahead.
Well, David, I wanted to run with that and just kind of play another clip that I think does a really great job of kind of really illustrating exactly what you're talking about the way that this was used. And this clip is about the kind of like, I guess this is really the first time that Bernays really turns it on. He is working for a cigarette company, and he consults with a psychoanalyst who A.A. Brill. And we're going to see, like right now in this short clip, we're going to see just what ends up happening. And I'd love for us to discuss it afterwards. So here we go.
A.A. Brill was one of the first psychoanalysts in America. And for a large fee, he told Bernays that cigarettes were a symbol of the penis and of male sexual power. He told Bernays that if he could find a way to connect cigarettes with the idea of challenging male power, then women would smoke, because then they would have their own penises. Every year, New York held an Easter Day parade to which thousands came. And Bernays decided to stage an event there. He persuaded a group of rich debutantes to hide cigarettes under their clothes. Then they should join the parade, and at a given signal from him, they were to light up the cigarettes dramatically. Bernays then informed the press that he had heard that a group of suffragettes were preparing to protest by lighting up what they called torches of freedom.
The next day, this was not just in all of the New York papers, it was across the United States and around the world. And from that point forward, the sale of cigarettes to women began to rise. He had made them socially acceptable with a single symbolic act.
It made him realize that it was possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent. It meant that irrelevant objects could become powerful emotional symbols of how you wanted to be seen by others.
Wow. So folks, think about that for a minute. So what Bernays did was to take the idea of the recognition that cigarettes themselves could be associated with rebellion. And so by linking smoking to women's liberation, which has no link whatsoever, and using the slogan torches of freedom to equate smoking with independence, Bernays literally effectively transforms cigarettes into somehow symbols of empowerment, demonstrates the influence of psychological tactics to shape consumer behavior. It is fucking evil what this does. It takes women's liberation, something that we should be struggling and fighting for, and especially at that time, it was already happening, right? So Bernays takes this idea of the desire for women's liberation, links it to a product, and then convinces women that smoking is an exercise of independence. And so literally they go along with it, being totally manipulated by the process, making this bastard even richer. It is
And what I
absolutely evil.
it's fascinating to me because I feel like this is something that we see throughout the past century, where it is people who are eschewing policy change for a feeling for again, like this evoking of a feeling, because it's like there was a social stigma against women smoking at the time, right? So it wasn't like that wasn't something that they could achieve, right? What they did was they did this event where they were in a parade, and they all smoked, and they were like, take a look at us. And it was women being quote unquote free. They were in a sense freeing themselves from this, social stigma against smoking, right? Against women smoking. But the point is that, Bernays was using like you were saying, David, like this underlying, it's a cause, a reason, an ideal that does make rational sense, right? That we want to be able, like women want to be liberated, right? But he was taking this legitimate concern and associating like a feeling of breakthrough for something that was simply symbolic. And in a sense, right, isn't that exactly the whole point of like kind of going after products, these symbols, like literally these objects, right? And going after those objects and acquiring those objects, it's all symbolic. It's not an actual, it's not that he was saying suffragettes, like the suffragettes who were trying to get the women's vote, right? Like women were not able to vote at the time. That smoking did nothing for that.
Right.
Even breaking down a social stigma, it still did not change policy in any way.
And let's be clear about this, y'all, that at that time, virtually no women smoked. Today, about 20% of women smoke cigarettes in the United States. Like, it is literally and we all know how horrific smoking is. I'm a former smoker myself. I was addicted to tobacco. It's a hard thing to quit. But I'll just tell you, like, the idea of tying cigarettes to liberation and women's freedom, it's perverse. There's no and that's just the tip of the iceberg about what we're going to be talking about through the course of this show. But I do think that it's one that's really important to lift up, because it shows how taking desires, including desires for liberation and freedom, can be really manipulated and undermined, really, in order to just sell some useless crap.
Yeah, I mean, like, just like exactly what you're saying. You're transferring the desire, a legitimate desire, and you're transferring it onto something that doesn't affect the material conditions to really acquire, like get the thing that you're desiring.
Which is to say power and liberation, right? And this is again why it's so important that we actually understand that the way that advertising works. Let's be like, I really want to lay it down for folks. Like members of this society, and I mean the United States of America, in this time period, we're talking now in 2024. We are arguably the most tested group of human beings that have ever existed on planet Earth. We are examined. We're tested in all sorts of ways. And what really gets me, Jack, is if you really break it down, they know what we want, or as my nieces have taught me, what we really, really want. It's a little hat tip to the Spice Girls. But what we really, really want is actually connection. What we really, really want is meaningful, productive work for which people will honor and respect us and admire us. What we really, really want, we do seem to want a fair amount of sex, but I would argue that that actually is just connection itself. What we really, really want when you think about it is community. We want to be engaged and we want to be meaningful parts of that community. Understood that way, humans, the hairless apes that we are kind of sweet. Like, oh, look at us. Like, we want to protect each other and ourselves. We want to do good things. We want to be acknowledged for the good things that we do. We want to be in community. Yay, that. Except the real magicians of our era, the alchemists, the really the most amazing artistic creative thinkers get together that science, and then they said, okay, take that knowledge about what people want and then manipulate people into thinking to feel these good things you have to buy some useless crap. And it's really nothing like, it's like a crack cocaine addiction, Jack, because the thing is, it's just in the act of acquiring a thing or a good that you can have that feeling. And it's very, it's momentary.
David, I can't emphasize to you enough that the people who came up with these ideas knew what they were doing. Like that's one of the things that comes across very clearly in this documentary is that like Bernays himself, like again, the originator of public relations, the guy who really basically like set off the advertising agency, the modern advertising agency. This was a man who was very clear that he did not trust people, that he did not believe in democracy, he did not believe in people and their ability to be able to make decisions for themselves, to choose choose people to represent them, to get what they wanted. This was really fundamental to his beliefs. And so it's like one of the I think one of the things that we'll kind of see as things go along is that like this is something that the elite themselves really sink their teeth into, because it gives them a good excuse for why they have the position that they have. Now I want to bring up another yes, toxic sludge is good to you. It is good for you. So I do want to bring up another clip. This is the origin of the focus group. Again, another thing that we kind of like take for granted, something that we've grown up knowing about, understanding focus group, sure, whatever. Up until this point, up until Bernays shows up, people are not like, nobody's asking, what do people think? How do people feel? They're not looking into that. They don't like regular people, and how they think and what they're feeling is not important. What is important is just, what the elites think. So, but here we have the origins of the focus group. And what's that about? It's about finding out what people think. Why? Not because we want to, kind of improve their schools, make them safer, get them better jobs, or, higher salaries, more benefits, none of that. It's how we want to know how they feel, what they think, so that we can sell them things better. So let me go ahead and bring up this clip about Dr. Dichter.
We don't go out and ask directly, why do you buy, why don't you? What we try to do instead is to understand the total personality, the self-image of the customer. We use all the resources of modern social sciences. It opens up some stimulating psychological techniques for selling any new product.
Like the other psychoanalysts, Dichter believed that American citizens were fundamentally irrational beings. They could not be trusted. Their real reasons for buying products were rooted in unconscious desires and feelings. And Dichter wanted to find ways to uncover what he called the secret self of the American consumer. Like many food manufacturers in the early 50s, they had invented a new range of instant convenience foods. But although consumers had told market researchers they would welcome the idea, in fact, they were refusing to buy them. The worst problem was the Betty Crocker cake mix. Dichter did a series of focus groups where housewives free associated about the cake mix. He concluded that they felt unconscious guilt at the new image being promoted of ease and convenience. Dictor told Betty Crocker to put an instruction on the packet that the housewife should add an egg. It would be an unconscious symbol, he said, of the housewife mixing in her own eggs as a gift to her husband, and so would lessen the guilt. Betty Crocker did it, and the sales soared.
My cake is ready.
The consumer may have basic needs that the consumer himself or herself doesn't fully understand. You have to know what those needs are in order to fully exploit the consumer.
Wow. So, like, this is the thing. Again, it is pure manipulation. It is done intentionally. It has an assumption that humans, and especially Americans, are basically foolish and don't think. And I want to lift up Howard's comment, and that is a comment about toxic sludge is good for you. Lies, damn lies in the public relations industry that came back out. I remember reading it during the global justice movement in the 90s. It was republished in 2002. Then Howard is also making a reference to manufacturing consent that came out in 2002. So, there is this, what Jack and I are trying to describe for you is literally documented. And they literally admit it. And I'm going to throw up Kelly, who is a frequent listener, viewer, and supporter. Holy smokes, that's nuts, she says, right? And I got to tell you, Kelly, I agree with you. It's nuts, but it's absolutely true. This is literally the way it operates, and the insidious nature of this. And this is back before, when it was quite rudimentary, right? We're talking about the beginning of it. It has gotten so good now that you have to really work hard. And that's why shows like Redneck Gone Green, I think, are so critically important, because it's ways for us to have honest to goodness conversation with each other, cut through the advertising and the manufactured consent, and have what I call unauthorized, unsanctioned conversation amongst ourselves. Because this is why, frankly, the Democratic and Republican parties, the leadership of those two parties, they would love it if we just yelled at each other across our team versus their team. They don't want to have real conversation about empire or capitalism or white supremacy. They don't want to have conversations about how the white working class are actually being horrifically exploited and abused by both Democrats and Republicans. They don't want those conversations, because those conversations could actually lead to liberty. And that is what they fear the most. They fear a self-aware, politically educated, truly conscious citizenry that actually understand what our interests are. Because I'm going to say it bluntly and boldly. The working class, and I don't just mean socioeconomic class, I mean the working class, the class of workers who do not own the means of production, which is to say the 99%, right? Our actual interests are best suited by being able to democratically control and own the means of production, so that we can decide what is produced and how. It's the only way that I believe that we'll be able to get a genuinely democratic, ecologically sustainable society. And that's why I think it's so important that we have conversations like this.
So, David, we've got a request from you from Rob, who asks, can you speak to the phrase "vote with your dollar" in regards to the climate movement?
Thank you, Rob, for that incredibly insightful question. Because first of all, the very idea of voting for your dollar is horrific and insulting, right? Because what it says is that the way, like in a representative democracy, your vote is your ability to actually participate in elected representation. Put aside for a moment that I prefer direct democracy. But even within the rubric of bourgeois petty democracy and representative democracy, the idea of voting is, we are going to take the consent of the governed, and you have to earn people's votes in order to be an elected representative, right? And you do that by voting. But the phrase voting with your dollar literally says whoever has the most dollars has the most power, because they have the most votes. So voting with your dollar is a way to try to turn people from engaged, active citizens who are trying to help to co-create the society that we live in, instead to mere consumers. And your power as a consumer is literally tied to your ability to buy or sell things. So it literally denigrates us as people to mere consumers. But wait, there's more. Do you know the origin of the word consume in Latin? Because I do. It literally means to use up to the point of destruction. I'm going to say that again. The word consumer comes from Latin, which means to use something up to the point of destroying it. So anytime people even do talk about use your consumer power, they're talking about your power to destroy, right?
Yeah.
And this is really horrific.
And I kind of want to piggyback on what Rob was asking you, what you were just talking about, which is that, what we're going to see as Century of the Self goes on, this is really kind of laying the groundwork to understand why we're in our current political moment. But we do see that what ends up happening is as a direct result of the way that we're marketed to and the way that we're basically programmed by the media, by our media that surrounds us and is constantly being input to us, is that, we today see politics as a consumer product, and that is really terrifying. And it's why we're so politically weak and dissociated from our political strength, I believe. And I want to continue on with this to kind of point out that at the time, and again, you also heard in that clip, that the people who were aware and kind of like invested in psychoanalysis understood this as a way of saying that the masses of people were basically needed to be governed by an elite, right? That they could not be trusted to make these decisions. And what I find really interesting is that this was not a universal approach or understanding that was taken by the elite. And in fact, FDR at the time was pushing back against it. And what FDR wanted to do is he engaged with Gallup and and his partner to actually poll the American public to get political, to basically understand better what kind of policies that they should put forth. And I want to play you a short clip about that because I find it really fascinating. Let me bring that up here.
Gallup and Roper rejected Bernays' view that human beings were at the mercy of unconscious forces and so needed to be controlled. Their system of opinion polling was based on the idea that people could be trusted to know what they wanted. They argued that one could measure and predict the opinions and behavior of the public if one asked strictly factual questions and avoided manipulating their emotions.
Prior to scientific polling, the view of many people was that you couldn't trust public opinion. It was irrational, that it was ill-informed, chaotic, unruly, and so forth. And so that opinion should be dismissed. But with scientific polling, I think it established very clearly that people are rational, that they do make good decisions, and this offers democracy a chance to be truly informed by the public, giving everybody a voice in the way the country is run.
And I find it really wonderful and interesting to see that there was this elite, despite FDR being obviously the elite of the elite, nevertheless, really like this understanding that there was a counter narrative that to Bernays and his toxic interpretation of the human psyche and the public and what it meant to what democracy really meant. What is Jack saying here?
I think it was more like they thought that people could be manipulated into knowing what they wanted. So she's like cutting through George Gallup's point, and I think I'm with Jack on this one, and I think that they are absolutely correct. I also want to circle back to Rob's earlier point, because he made two really: the idea of voting with your dollar, but also British Petroleum's creation and promotion of the concept of the carbon footprint. Because I think that it takes a little bit of understanding, but once you understand the history and the context there, it really does show us something. Remember, British Petroleum created the concept carbon footprint, and they did so as a way to measure, quote, individual responsibility, end quote. And that individual responsibility for the climate crisis literally completely deflects away from the reality that climate change is being driven by systems and by industries and by a ruling elite. So the tactic of conveniently shifts blame onto consumers while
Onto the
absolving
individual.
corporations from
Yep.
their impact. It
Yeah.
downplays the systemic issues that are required for true large-scale solutions, such as regulating the corporate bastards who are destroying the planet, such as developing renewable energy investment. It literally hyper-individualizes something that is, in fact, only solved through collective action.
Right,
So
but
to
the thing
me,
but the thing about that, David, is that would require that we're thinking outside of ourselves as individuals. What's going to make me feel good, right? Right. So it's not as powerful for you to say like, oh, well, we need the systems change. So like we need to be able to work together to, get this system change to really make a difference. And instead it goes down to, well, I can feel better because I'm doing something about my carbon footprint. And it's the same thing with recycling, David. You know this, right? You know that recycling was also invented by the oil industry, right, to be able to do exactly the same thing. And we're seeing the way that this relates directly back to Bernays' ideas of manipulating people's feelings to be able to sell them on an idea or a product. It's exactly what we're seeing here.
So I want to lift up Catherine's point, which I think is a good one. Catherine, again, is another frequent listener and viewer here of Redneck Gone Green. She says, we keep using the term elite, and yet there are several definitions for that word. So I think that's an important one. So I should actually be saying, and I'll accept the correction, I should really be saying the predatory class or the ruling class. Because you know what? They're not elite. They're not better than we are.
Right.
In fact, they're in a very real way, they're damaged. Like, honestly, y'all, if we had a just and compassionate healthcare system, single payer healthcare, if we had a just and compassionate healthcare system, we would recognize that the real predatory class, they're not even the 1%, by the way, the 0.001%, the billionaire class, right? They are actually damaged individuals. These are people, they're sociopaths. These are people
Agree.
who are so incredibly damaged that they are willing to pillage and plunder and destroy all for their own sense. And they know exactly what they're doing. There's nothing that they should be lifted up for. Really, if we had a healthy society, we would recognize that they're mentally ill and they need help. And instead of getting them the help that they so desperately need, they're in charge. And as my brother Ty, another good redneck, says, and I remember he was a single father. He raised two daughters, my nieces, who I love and adore. He would often tell my nieces, hey, it may not be your fault, but it is your problem. So that's what I kind of feel like. This predatory class who are destroying the planet, all just to get extra zeros on their bank account, right? It's just a concept. Yeah, like Lisa says, let's stop complimenting them. Like the point is, it may not be our fault that we're in this situation, but it's damn sure our problem. And I think that for me, one of the things about Redneck Gone Green, what we're trying to do is say, let's understand what's actually happening so that we can make and implement plans to actually solve the problems. And again, I'm really not trying to just vilify people, right? I'm not interested in just shame and blame. I'm interested in identifying problems so that we may solve them. identifying gaps so that we may close them. But this program and understanding Century of the Self and the creation of advertising and public relations to deceive us, this is part of the problem. And if we don't understand it, we will find ourselves pitted against each other in ways that are only in the interest of the predatory class rather than the working class.
And I do think it's really important to consider like the history of it and the methods that are used, because this is something that's been going on since the moment that we were born. I mean, like this has been happening since the 1900s, the early 1900s. This is something that has been, it's so ubiquitous to our society, to all our communities. I can't tell you how many times that I have been watching this and just watching this documentary and reflected on my own personal journey and just like the direction that my politics went in and how it was so clearly influenced and degraded by these concepts, by these ideas, like this individualism, this the short-sightedness of just kind of like emotional fulfillment of individual needs. It's really essential.
It is. And again, I want to lift up Jack, a frequent viewer and listener of Redneck Gone Green, who writes in to say, manipulating feelings of guilt. How many parents take out loans at Christmas so they can afford to pay for presents for their children or their child? And I think that's a very powerful reminder, right? And I don't know if, like, I still remember a Christmas. I'm very proud that in my family, we stopped exchanging Christmas gifts first amongst adults with the idea that, well, Christmas is for children, right? And so let's still get Christmas gifts for kids. But then I remember, Jack, and I'm not going to name any names, but I remember watching a little nephew who had all these gifts like continuously shoved at him. And it was clear that he was tired and cranky, was not even having any fun opening the gifts anymore. But yet it was being forced down his throat just so that the gift giver could feel good about it.
Could feel good.
Now, again, like, I get it. They want to feel good. They want to give love. But you know what? Like, all you need to do is pick up that baby, and like that baby will be happy and feel loved. Or go outside and play ball with that kid, right? Or do anything outside that they want to do. The idea that buying things is an expression of love, and that receiving things is how you receive love, this is not only wrong, it is why we're destroying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself. This is a fundamental problem, and it is not only is it wrong, I will say it again, y'all, it is evil. It is wrong. It is the creation of a crack cocaine addiction that it's like the great Buddhist joke about, or not joke, the great Buddhist parable about the hungry ghost. The hungry ghost that eats and eats and eats, but is never satisfied. Why? Because the ghost is eating, but it's a ghost. What it needs is not food. So what I would say is, things we keep buying and buying and buying and think that we're going to get into some sort of liberation or feeling good about ourselves, but we never do, because it's not the things that are going to make us happy. What's actually going to fulfill us is meaningful, productive work done in community that is creating the society that most of us want. And that's why I was so excited when Jack said, hey, let's do Century of the Self as a show, and let's really break it down.
So, David, I want to lift up Kelly's comment that I think is really interesting, because what it does is it takes what we've been talking about regarding like the individual satisfaction. Like, okay, like I'm going to buy a product because it's going to make me feel a certain way. I'm going to get my own personal satisfaction out of like buying a product or subscribing to a particular idea. What I find interesting about what Kelly brings up here is that it flips things around, and it really kind of like, it really does show, it really exposes the insidiousness and the toxicity of this kind of like individual consumerism, because what it does is, okay, well, if I'm satisfied, by, if I'm doing my job by individually, like my carbon footprint, by my individually recycling, or whatever other kind of like clever campaign that the extractive industries have come up with to be able to foist it on me, the people who aren't doing it, those individuals are the problem. That person over there, that's not my brother, that's not my sister, that's not a person who's part of my community. That's a person who is not doing their individual job, their individual responsibility that they have, right? Because that's how I get my satisfaction. I know that's where my satisfaction comes from, right? By doing this individual action. Therefore, they need to be doing that individual action. The reason that I'm not seeing change in my environment is because the individuals aren't taking the steps that I know I take and I need to take, right? And so it's like, it's this kind of like, it's a dissolving of community. Like because you're like, when you do think about other people, you're thinking about them just in the way that they consume as individuals, not as part of the whole that you have a responsibility for, or vice versa. Does that make sense?
100%. And again, Kelly, I thank you very much for not only making that point, but also I want to go back to it because it is also the otherization. And this is going to set me up. I'm going to react to Kelly and then bring in Rob's comment. Because Kelly, your point about taking money or immigrants taking your job, and I'll resist the, no, I can't do it. Take your job. They took our jobs for the South Park fans amongst us, right? So this idea is, think about it. It otherizes. So instead of empathizing with, oh, there's a worker who's been exploited, or somebody who is in desperate need of food stamps, or somebody else, it literally otherizes them and puts us in a position of imagining and thinking that we are better than them, and it pits us against one another. That's why I thought that your point, Kelly, was so very like your point was on point and really underscores and sets us up for Rob's comment or question, and that is there a difference between the way liberal capitalists manipulate us to buy useless crap versus the way fascists manipulate people for much worse purposes? And I want to take that head on because I think it's important. They are both manipulating, right? And so manipulation is antithetical to the kind of liberation and self-autonomy and freedom that I and Jack, and I suspect all listeners, viewers of Redneck Gone Green would share. So the manipulation it's the same process. But the liberal capitalists at least are simply manipulating because they're just trying to get rich, right? Like a shitty incentive to be sure, but the fascists are much more dangerous because the fascists have an ideology that is actually grounded in otherization. It is an ideology that is grounded upon the idea that some people don't even deserve to live or exist. So the difference between the two are, to what end is the manipulation happening? So what I'd call the useless idiots, the brown shirts, the white working class, and ever more often even people of color in the working class who are being manipulated and confused by, frankly, Donald Trump and others, like that's one thing. But the actual fascists who know what they're doing, the Steve Bannons of the world, like they know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it on purpose in order to pit us against each other, which again brings us back. I feel like our audience is now like doing the show because Kelly writes in to say we are all oppressed. They want us to take it out on each other rather than those who are responsible. Jack comes in with, and isn't there this idea that there's no good pursuing an activity, hobby, or sport if you're not good enough at it to earn a living? How many people have given up on an activity that they enjoy because they can't actually make money at it? Jack finishes it with, wouldn't it be nice if we could pursue our passions, whether there was any skill in them or not? And like, again, like, I just love this conversation. I think absolutely, this idea underscores literally why we did this show. And Jack, I got to say, the show is flying by. We got about 5 minutes left. That gives me the opportunity to remind folks that you are watching and or listening to Redneck Gone Green. This is a show where we try to inspire people to educate people to know what the hell is happening, and then inspire people to do something about it. Right? So this is not just a litany of ain't it awful. This show at Redneck Gone Green is a desire to educate, to inspire, to empower, and ultimately to strategize about what is it that we can actually do. And so I want to remind you, please like, share, and subscribe. Our Substack is at 4,000 and growing. And I want to ask you, for real, if you're listening to this on a podcast, if you're watching this video live or watching it after the fact on Rumble or YouTube or even Facebook, please go to our Substack. It's very conveniently titled Redneck Gone Green, and subscribe. You can subscribe absolutely free, but it gives us an opportunity to build our audience and build a base. Because again, what we're doing as we build an audience is not try to sell you something. What we're trying to do is inspire collective action together. That's why I think that how we can actually build a movement that is strong enough and powerful enough to go up against the consumer or the predatory class that have taken us over. And so I'm going to give Jack an opportunity for any final thoughts or words, because we always try to keep our program to about an hour. So Jack, your concluding thoughts or observations?
Thank you, brother. I just can't tell you, there's so much to talk about. This is really just such a deep topic. There is so much to discuss and to pull apart and understand. I do think that this is really an important topic to consider, because I really do believe that what these themes are pointing to is a fundamental undermining of the democratic process. And I believe that, consumerism is counter-revolutionary. I think that the strategy and tactics that are used by corporations and their enablers is on display in this documentary. I think what it reveals, I think it's really important that we revisit this. I'm considering like making my own kind of like short, mini commentary documentary on it or whatever, because there is just so much here. It's so important for us to appreciate our relationship to our community, to understand that our freedom comes from our community. That's where the uplift comes from, is like the relationship that we have to the people that we are part of in our society. And so I'm really glad that you're my brother in this, and that the people who are part of the greater Redneck Gone Green community are part of this, and that we're working on building a better world for all of us. And I'm really glad to be a part of it. Thanks, David.
You're so very welcome. And I want to remind folks, again, we come at you every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time. Jack, I know that you watch us and listen to us at the UK. It's an hour earlier than usual because, hey, time is just a construct, right? So literally here in the continental US, the entire nation literally just shifted our time. So when people say that we can't do X, Y, or Z, I'm like, are you kidding? Like literally constructs can be deconstructed and reconstructed. That's also why, we will have a conversation at some point on money and where that comes from and how and why, Howard. So thanks for participating and making that conversation. Next week, we're going to be joined by musician and artist Tom Nielsen. I think you'll love that show because, as you know, here on Redneck Gone Green, we understand the role of art and culture in helping to build a movement. And so next week, 3 o'clock Pacific, 6 o'clock Eastern. Join us on Redneck Gone Green. In the meantime, don't stop. Keep fighting for the peaceful, just, democratic, and ecologically sustainable world that we so desperately need and so richly deserve. Peace.